Emotional regulation is more than just staying calm. It's about building self-awareness and understanding the purpose behind the intense emotions or responses that you are experiencing. This is going to help you manage the reactions as they come up with a sense of empowerment rather than avoidance, which is totally fair because when those things come up, the last thing we want to do is sit in them. And we're going to talk in this episode about the tools that you can use right away to create emotional safety in the space that you're in the particular situation that's coming up for yourself, with your partner, and through the conflict or, tough conversation that you might be in order to move through all of these sometimes overwhelming but very powerful emotions. So let's dive in. Welcome to Essence, the podcast that helps you liberate yourself by understanding the heart of your relationship patterns. For the empathetic woman ready to transform that relationship overwhelm into liberation, I'm Olivia Heine, your host and coach in NLP, cycle syncing, and relationship dynamics. I'm here to guide you through emotional regulation, shadow work, and self-discovery that leads to true healing. If you're someone who feels deeply, who often puts your needs last, or is navigating challenging times in your relationship, you are in the right place. Together, we'll explore what it means to show up authentically, articulate your needs, and embrace the kind of conflict that can actually cultivate deeper connection, so that you can create more fulfilling relationships by being fully seen. This is all about uncovering the essence of who you are and how and why you show up in your relationships the way that you do. So let's dive in. Welcome back to Essence. I'm so happy you're here. I'm your host, Olivia Heine, and I'm here to help you move from overwhelmed to liberated in your relationships through navigating any and all challenges or conflicts that might arise and really dive deep into getting to the core of understanding and healing your relationship patterns. This is what creates true connection and true deep intimacy. And ultimately, your one-on-one relationships are the place of serious growth in your life because they tend to be the things and the places and the people that trigger you the most. So today is the second episode in a 3-part foundation series so that you can get everything that you need as we continue to dive into more episodes here, but that you can always come back to these core pillars of what do you need to understand in order to shift the way that you're showing up in your relationships, feel more liberated emotionally when you move through navigating challenges or difficult dynamics, as well as creating deeper connection and more intimacy. So today we're talking about emotional regulation with a twist, how to feel grounded and connected even through moments of conflict. And this can often be the hardest time to stay connected to the person you are in partnership or in a relationship with. And again, I've said this before, but this can be any personal one-on-one relationship. Truthfully, this could also be a professional one-on-one relationship, so any form of a one-on-one relationship that you have, but we are specifically focusing on that personal relationship dynamic, romantically speaking. But as you listen to this, if something else resonates with you or you're going through a challenging time navigating a one-on-one relationship that doesn't pertain to a romantic relationship, this could be with a parent, this could be with a friend, this could be with a colleague or someone that you're working with, business partner, client, boss. It's whatever one-on-one dynamics are happening for you in your life, because that really, this mirroring that happens there is this me versus the other. And that person is always mirroring something back to me as long as you're working closely, living closely together with them on some level. There's this one-on-one connection, okay? So the emotional side of things is really about how do you stay regulated emotionally when, number one, a situation triggers you, and number two, actually addressing the situation or the emotions that you're feeling or the needs that you need to have met comes up in conversations and you feel emotionally all over the place within communicating, right? So there's, again, 2 layers. We talked about this in the first episode last week. If you haven't listened to that yet, I do recommend going back to listen to that because it is a powerful shift in understanding what deep connection in relationships actually comes down to, and that it's not really all about communication as we're told. There's actually something missing in that formula, and that's what I talk about there. But in order to understand how you emotionally regulate yourself, we need to understand what's actually happening in your reactions. And the concept and topic I want to talk about here is triggers. And maybe you're familiar with this. Maybe you've done a lot of inner healing work. Maybe you've done a lot of reflective work. Maybe this term is super new to you. But essentially, what it means is that when you are in a situation and you experience an emotional response, a trigger is something that sets off that emotional response. So you can be in a conversation with your partner or in your relationship with this other person, and their words, their actions, the topic that you're talking about suddenly makes you feel really judged or dismissed or criticized. And maybe they're asking for something and you feel irritated that they're asking for it. You're like, why don't you fucking know this? Like, why are we having this conversation again? It's all about what is causing you in that moment to have that emotional response. And that is what the trigger is. Okay. So, for example, your partner seems irritated or makes a request of you, and maybe you feel in that moment like, oh my God, I didn't do it right, or I messed up, or they're angry with me now because I didn't do it right, or I'm not good enough. I'm not enough right now for them. And it's really interesting when we start to understand that what we mostly look at is just how I'm responding in the moment, right? So you have that situation that triggers you, and then you just feel the emotion and it kind of overwhelms you and it causes you then to react in a certain way towards your partner. And this is often where fights start to break out, right? Where you start pointing fingers or blaming, or you just feel really attacked by them. So you completely shut yourself off. It also tends to be where we, instead of really regulating ourselves, we reach for stories, right? So it's like, well, this always happens all the time, or like they think I'm a terrible person, or I can never do anything right. And we start to like spiral a little bit, which obviously does not help ourselves in regulating ourselves emotionally. It just expands how we feel so emotionally triggered. So, what I want you to first and foremost understand is that these reactions are so normal. Okay. It is a part of being human to have emotional responses. We are emotional beings. And if you are a highly empathetic woman or human on this planet, which I'm assuming you are because those are the women that I work with, you're going to feel this really deeply, right? You're constantly navigating big emotions and you care so deeply, you feel so deeply. So feeling like someone's upset with you or feeling like you didn't hit the mark on something takes an even bigger toll on you or becomes an even bigger trigger because you're already feeling so deeply, right? And we have a whole scale of how different kinds of people navigate emotions differently. And if you are, again, this empathetic human, it's going to feel really big, right? And so we want to make sure that you know how to regulate yourself through that so that you can hold it, so that it doesn't feel so overwhelming. But it's very normal to immediately respond emotionally because of this with things like anger, blame, sadness, withdrawal, avoidance. But the important thing to understand here is that these responses are tied to something deeper. They're tied to unresolved feelings. They're tied to unresolved feelings that are connected to past experiences or past memories, often also trauma-based memories, as opposed to being tied to this present moment alone. So already we can lift off some of that weight of like, I'm an angry person or like I freak out all the time. No, it's not about this situation actually. It's about what this situation triggered within you. And therefore you reached back into your past to understand, okay, I felt this way before. This is what this situation means about me. This is attached to the belief of what I believe about myself here, about how relationships go. And then therefore, this is how I need to respond. And it happens in the blink of an eye. And all of a sudden you're angry. All of a sudden you're raising your voice. All of a sudden you're like dropping everything and withdrawing, right? So again, just important to understand that on the initial response level, this is coming from something deeper. It's very normal to feel emotions, to have emotional responses. It's part of being human. But the shift happens now, and this is what we'll talk about, when you understand that, yes, these responses come from an unconscious, pre-programmed place because of what you experienced in the past, but it is in your power to shift the way that you're showing up now so that you don't need to respond that way, so that you can actually respond in a calm, open, grounded way, not forcing that upon yourself, not forcing yourself to stay calm and breathe through it, but actually feeling emotionally regulated and grounded because you've addressed the deeper unresolved feelings that are attached to this particular trigger, okay? So emotions are not random. They are not random aggressive forces. They are actually messengers for you that are trying to express an unmet need or a deep-seated fear that's coming up. So again, as an example, if that irritation from your partner makes you feel criticized, it can connect back to this past experience of a time where you didn't feel good enough. And maybe that was in school, maybe that was growing up, maybe that was actually in a past relationship. And this is where it's really so important to understand that relationships don't have to be toxic. Relationships don't have to be unhealthy for you to have these emotional triggers or emotional responses or patterns that are playing out. You can be in a very healthy and positive and happy relationship and still have these triggers, still have these responses. Not because the other person is doing anything, it simply is bringing up something that is still an unmet need from within you. So when we can shift and start to see our emotions as messengers, our inner world asking us for something, our inner child asking us for something, you can then shift in that moment and ask the question, what is this feeling trying to tell me? What is my inner self asking for through how I'm responding right now? The loud emotions are not about suppressing, right? We're not trying to push away the emotions. We're not trying to quiet them. We want to let them be there fully and completely. That's actually part of regulating your emotions. And I think that this is where like a lot of steps or processes miss this step, or when emotional regulation is talked about, we miss this step. Like it is so important to fully lean into feeling that emotion, which actually can be really loud. It can be filled with a lot of anger. It can be filled with a lot of silence or sadness, rather, not silence. That's the whole point. So it's not about suppressing the emotion, but it's about recognizing that they're trying to help you move through something, or that this is bringing up something for you that gets to be released, that gets to flow up from wherever it's, creaked away and hidden away in your body and your inner being, and it gets to be released. It gets to move out of you, move through you, even if this might feel overwhelming. And that's exactly what we want to shift now so that they don't feel so overwhelming in that moment for you. However, it makes so much sense that the emotional responses can feel overwhelming, right? Emotional patterns can feel like a lot because, like I just said, they can be loud, but they can also kind of make you feel like you're out of control, right? They can make you feel like, oh, again, there's this side of myself here that's like, she's angry. Like, I am scared of her. She has a lot of feelings about this. And like, that's also not socially acceptable in my world. Like, maybe it wasn't acceptable for you to fully express the extent of your feelings growing up or in your past relationship. And so, of course, it's like, shh, like, quiet down in there. This isn't allowed here. Like, just manage it for a moment and then it'll subside and then we'll be able to move on and return back to the role that I'm expected to show up in, like the happy, caring, go lucky, empathetic, nurturing person that I am, however you're seen, right? And so we start to avoid the emotions. And it's really, really interesting because I've been doing this work for a long time. And even years into doing this work, I had to catch myself. And even now, there's still moments where I have to catch myself from time to time and recognize that there's a desire to kind of just sweep over the emotion. It's like, oh, yeah, I addressed it. And it's like, no, you didn't. We didn't actually allow ourselves to lean into it. So if you are a more practiced, someone who's been doing this work for a while, who's been doing nervous system regulation work, deep inner healing, shadow work, etc. Like addressing it with curiosity and like, this is not about getting it perfect. You don't need to prove to anyone that you can do this perfectly. The point here is also understanding or acknowledging to an extent, like, am I still feeling overwhelmed by my emotions? Are there certain times where I kind of just like sidestep it and I'm just like, not going to look at that right now. And then we forget to come back to it. And although emotions can feel overwhelming, especially in the moment when they come up or when you're sitting down to actually look at them and sit with them, emotions are not uncontrollable. We kind of think of emotions as like the free spirit. And I actually talked about that inside my course Liberation, that the emotions can sometimes feel like that mom in an indie movie who just runs off with like any next guy that comes her way. And so she's like out of control and we don't know what to expect from her. And that's kind of what emotions can feel like. And so we don't really trust them, right? And especially when there's a tough conflict-based situation or a tough conversation that we need to have in our relationship, it's like, oh, I don't really trust myself that I'm going to be able to stay calm here, or that like I'm not going to get upset or overwhelmed by this. So while emotions might feel intense, they're never too much. It's not something that makes you too much. It's not something that you need to like manage in that way, or something that you need to be afraid of or fear. But the more that you sit with them, the more you start to get to the essence of who you are. Again, exactly what we're doing here, exactly what we're talking about here, where you understand your emotions, you understand the responses, you understand where they're coming from, you understand the initial core experience that it's triggered by, why you're having that response. And when you do that, emotions start to become manageable, but only when you really allow yourself to do this deeper work. It's also super important for you to reflect on how intertwined you are with your emotions. Often we identify deeply with our emotions, like, I'm an anxious person. I'm always hurting people. I'm always the bad guy. Like, I am the problem because of XYZ. Like, we start to identify ourselves with the emotions that we feel. Like, I always freak out. I always lose my cool. Like, just starting to think about the ways in which you are not just seeing an emotional response as something that you feel, something that is meant to move through you and be released, but as like an actual part of yourself. And this is really, really crucial because these identities and identification with your emotions and the way that you respond, being like, this is the kind of person I am, oh well, they keep you stuck in the cycle because they're actually serving some sort of purpose for you. And this is where it gets really interesting. And we'll talk about this more throughout this podcast. I talk about this inside Liberation, inside my course. But you are actually gaining something from the emotions that you get to hold on to. So as much as you might think like, oh, I don't want to freak out in this way, I don't want to cry when I have this conversation about like my needs being met with my partner, for example, or when my partner seemingly is irritated by something that I've done, I don't want to actually feel anxious about that all the time. I want to be able to separate myself from his emotions. But underneath all of that, there's a part of you that gains from that. And this is totally unconscious. So don't feel like this is an attack or a blame. Whenever you dig deeper, you're like, I see what I'm gaining from this. So for example, if you cried as a child and you got attention, there might be that emotional response attached to it of like, oh, when I am emotional, like I ease the situation and then I get the attention that I need. And it's fulfilling a need, right? Like, you crying during a difficult conversation is actually fulfilling a need for you. And that doesn't need to be the end all be all, solution to that. If that's what you experience, that doesn't mean that that's the underlying root pattern. But it starts to connect back to, like, I'm actually kind of wanting to keep this emotional response for some deep unconscious reason because I'm getting what I actually need through responding in this emotional way. Are we following this? Like, is this not mind-blowing to you? Like, this to me is just like, holy fucking shit. Like, everything is clicking together right now. So let's talk about some ways to identify your triggers and how to ground yourself through these triggers so that you can respond from a place of feeling really emotionally regulated. So again, if you know what your triggers are, this is a really great time to just reflect, take some time to journal and see what tends to be my response pattern. How do I tend to respond in difficult conversations with my partner specifically, or in relationships in general? How do I usually feel in relationships? Like, do I feel generally like an angry response? Do I feel generally an emotional response? Am I nervous? Am I feeling anxious a lot of the time? Like, just start to write down, brain dump it all out, and see what that common thread is. And this is just for you if you are wanting to go deeper to kind of start to identify the trigger. But what I want to invite you to do, and as a tool for grounding yourself in the moment when things come up, if possible, tell the person who you are in that conversation with or in that moment with that you just need a moment for yourself right now. Say like, I just need 2 minutes, 5 minutes to just regulate my emotional system right now before we have this conversation or before I address this, so that I can address it from, a calm, grounded place. And for the most part, I mean, not always, but for the most part, we respond to triggers that aren't necessarily in the moment as well. Like maybe 50% of them is your partner bringing something up in the moment or doing something in the moment. But it can also be like you walk into the kitchen and the dishes aren't done yet. Or again, your partner says, oh, I'm going to be late, or doesn't let you know that they're going to be late and just comes home late. And then you're stewing in your emotional response, right? That's also a really powerful time to catch it and give yourself that moment to say, okay, let me just sit in what's coming up right now. Can I just feel what I'm feeling? So again, that's why having just that moment of space for yourself is a really, really simple but powerful technique to use. And then there's 2 things that you can do when you sit with yourself. The first thing is regulating your nervous system. And there's a few ways that you can do that. I'm just going to give you 3 really basic ones, and that's touch, sound, and movement. So feeling what's coming up, allowing it to be there, allowing yourself to lean into it, and then doing something like hugging yourself, rubbing your arms, rubbing your own back, rubbing your tummy, whatever feels good to you, some form of touch, gentle touch. You can add some movement into that, like swaying. That's also really regulating for the nervous system. And if you would like as well, sound, which is something like humming, like, that's more than enough. Activates the vagus nerve and helps regulate your nervous system. So you don't need to do all of them. You can pick one, have your go-to, or you can use all 3 of them. Again, these are just a few really simple tools and examples so that as you sit in the moment and you feel the emotions that are coming up, your nervous system is getting the response of, I'm safe. It's okay for me to feel this right now. Like, I can feel this. I can hold myself through feeling this right now. And really allowing yourself to lean into what's coming up. If you're pissed and you're angry, let that be there. Really allow the anger to come up and be there. And then ask the question, what do I need? What is this emotion trying to communicate with me? What need is not getting met for me right now? And how can I either meet this need for myself? Because a lot of the times when we are younger, when we're small children and we feel like a need is unmet, that need could only be met by a parental figure or a guardian, right? It's an adult needed to meet that need for us. We were just kids. But now you are the adult. And so you can fulfill the need for yourself. And that's also why we say, or why we hear a lot of people say, like, you have to be in that relationship with yourself first before you can be in a relationship with anyone else. It's about feeling fulfilled and whole on your own, for sure. And that's so much about this emotional groundedness and regulation. But it might also bring up the answer of like, what do I need from my partner in this moment? And again, please go back and listen to the first episode in the series from last week, all about communication, because it makes it so obvious then that it's not actually about the situation at hand, but about something deeper within yourself that's coming from that core experience, triggering this pattern, triggering this response that needs to be addressed. And that's where you can then start to address it. And then you can go back into that conversation and actually address the thing that this is actually about, right? It's not about the dishes. It's not about coming home late. And maybe it's even a bigger issue than, dishes. Same system applies. Maybe you even go back out and you realize like, this is not the time for this conversation. And so again, you just get that like little beat to regulate yourself, sit with what's coming up, get clarity, and then be able to ask for what you need. So these practices don't inherently make the emotion go away, because what actually makes the emotion go away is going back to that core root pattern and releasing the limiting decision, the fear, the pattern that's attached to this shadow side, really fully and deeply at its core, at the root. But these are tools that you can use in the moment to give space so that you understand what the emotion is really asking you for, and to really allow yourself to respond thoughtfully instead of impulsively. And that's the whole point here, right? That's also going to make you feel way more calm in the actual conversation that then happens after that particular triggering situation. So, the idea of emotional regulation, to close this out, is really about reclaiming a sense of control, not over your partner's actions or reactions, but over your own responses, over your own reactions. And what this work really, really comes down to is emotional independence and emotional sovereignty. I always struggle with that word, because the more grounded you can be within yourself, and the more grounded you're in yourself, you can be in yourself, comes down to the more you understand yourself, the essence of who you are, where your patterns come from, what's triggering to you. The more grounded you can be in yourself like that, the more grounded you can then show up in your conversations, in your relationship with your partner, and actually get your needs met. But part of that is also knowing I have my own back, right? Like, I don't need to overgive. I don't need to overextend myself. I don't need to be anxious about how they're feeling right now because I'm worried that that's somehow, affecting us in our relationship. Like, that's giving away way too much of your energy and power to the other person. We want you to stay grounded in your own emotional power, in your own emotional independence, that whatever anyone else's response is, you get to stay regulated, you get to stay grounded. And that's what this is really about. So again, asking yourself, reflecting on those triggers, what your responses are like, and asking what's really coming up for me here, and seeing the emotions as cues for personal growth instead of obstacles or things that need to be avoided or pushed aside. I'm going to leave 2 journal prompts in the show notes below as well, so that you can dive a little bit deeper. We've talked about the prompts already, but it's just going to give you a little bit more of a direction to go in, a few more like prompting cues. But this is really a core foundation to deepening your relationships and increasing the intimacy that you feel. And also, back to last week's episode, being able to actually communicate your needs clearly. Because until you understand what's going on within yourself, until you know yourself so incredibly well, it's going to be really hard to communicate that to anyone else. So I'm going to leave you with that. Next week, we're going to talk about the actual shadow work, what the shadow side of this is, like where these triggers come from, the patterns that are showing up for you, and how you can start to go into that shadow work for yourself. So tune in then. And until then, have a beautiful week, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for joining me on Essence. I hope today's episode gave you new insights and encouragement on your path to showing up authentically and embracing honest communication and connection. Remember, each step you take, whether it's setting a boundary, speaking up for your needs, or recognizing a pattern, brings you closer to a liberated, empowered self. If this episode resonated with you, please share it or leave a review to help us reach more listeners. Until next time, stay true to your essence, trust in your path, and keep showing up as the cycle breaker you are.